Good afternoon, Saitlanders. How are you? I sincerely hope that you are very well. Excuse me. As you know, we may be getting into doing a series of videos on World War III. And in the end, I ended up entitling, whether we go ahead with the series or not, I entitled the first one, Apokalupsis number 1. And we'll see how we go. Apokalupsis is the Greek for removal of the veil. And the book of Revelation is, of course, a removal, to reveal. And so we're talking about possibly that we may be moving into end times. And those of you who watch Mr. Miller's morning videos, or not watch videos, listen to Mr. Miller's morning sermon, if that's the right word, his lecture, will know by now that it is a fascinating subject, absolutely fascinating. Now, I am not as proficient as he is in the prophetic stuff, the biblical stuff, and that's why, although in the end we didn't name it World War III, I considered, as I alluded in the previous video, that I considered I was going to call it World War III, because it's not about me endeavoring to mimic or impersonate, to mimic Mr. Miller's work poorly, but rather my layman's take on the things that are happening in the world that might suggest a really, the ultimate critical phase in human history. So this is number 2, and we continue with Dmitry Medvedev. As I mentioned to you, he has said in the past 4 months 2 very foreboding, if that's the right word, things drawn from the book of Revelations. He's made 2 statements drawn from the book of Revelation. So let's carry on and cover the second thing that he said in a telegram message about 4 weeks ago. Absolutely fascinating. So I think how we'll do it is I'll read to you an article published on this second statement. I'll read the whole article. It's in Russia Today, and it was published on the 13th of September. That's not 4 weeks ago, that's 6 or 7 weeks ago. Nonetheless, I've lost track of time. Medvedev issues apocalyptic warning to West over Ukraine. Now, as we've already discussed more than once, apocalyptic doesn't mean dramatic or powerful or frightening or threatening. It means revelationary, revealing, a revealing warning to the West over Ukraine. And I put it to you that whichever journalists of Russia Today are permitted to cover Dmitry Medvedev and Vladimir Putin are among the best journalists in Russia. And Russia has a proud tradition of language. Many of the greatest authors of history, no matter who you take, the English have dominated it. The best is probably a Spaniard. The single finest book ever written was probably Don Quixote. But in the rest of the world, the English language has dominated. And so sometimes we forget that Pushkin, Chekhov, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky were all Russian. And that's just to scratch at the surface. These people know and understand language. And the best journalist in Russia, when writing about one of the most important people in Russia, I would suggest, chooses his words very carefully. The former Russian president used a book of Revelation, quote, to comment on Kiev security treaty demands. Western half-wits from stupid think tanks are leading their countries down the road of nuclear Armageddon with their hybrid war against Moscow. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev wrote on his Telegram channel on Tuesday. I know a few letters, not words, in Russian. Because I do lots of research on various things. So you pick up small things, various things that they're doing in Ukraine. And so I follow his Telegram channel. For no point, because I can't read a word. But I saw the length of the post. It was a long post, as you're going to see now, as you're going to hear now. Endlessly funneling weapons and support to Ukraine while pretending not to be directly involved in the conflict will not work, added the deputy chair of the Russian Security Council. And I'd like to just interject here by saying that, or digress by saying that he was dead serious about that on the 13th of September, or on the 12th of September. Imagine how he and Vladimir Putin feel now that the USA has posted the 101st Airborne Division, which is self-described. They describe themselves in these terms, as the spearhead of any US military action or military engagement. So, Airborne Division, the equivalent of our Parabat Battalion. And since the USA has, just in recent days, posted soldiers in Ukraine putatively, supposedly, to track down weapons that they've donated to Ukraine that have gone missing. The security guarantees proposal unveiled by Kiev on Tuesday. So Kiev, Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine, made some proposals on that self-same Tuesday in which he made that Telegram post, Dmitry Medvedev made the Telegram post, was really a prologue to the Third World War, said Medvedev, calling it a hysterical appeal to Western countries engaged in a proxy war against Russia. A proxy war against Russia. So this is how they see it. They see it not as a war with Ukraine, but as a proxy war with the West. The West's proxy being Ukraine. If the West continues its unrestrained pumping of the Kiev regime with the most dangerous types of weapons, excuse me, I'm hiccuping from drinking my Oros too quickly, Russia's military campaign will move to the next level, where visible boundaries and potential predictability of actions by the parties to the conflict will be erased, and the conflict will take on a life of its own, as wars always do, Medvedev argued. And then the Western nations will not be able to sit in their clean homes, laughing at how they carefully weaken Russia by proxy. Everything will be on fire around them. Their people will harvest their grief in full. The land will be on fire and the concrete will melt, Medvedev wrote, before citing a Bible verse from Revelation 9:18. Now, before we examine what is the content of the book of Revelation chapter 9 verse 18, isn't it interesting to observe this direct quote? The land will be on fire and the concrete will melt, when we consider Oom-Sina van Rensburg's prophecies, where he alluded to, he said to his daughter in one exchange, when he had a certain particular vision, he said to her, The weapons are so bad that I don't have words for them, or so terrible, I forget the exact words. So terrible that I don't have words for them. And he talked about, again, I may be quoting slightly erroneously, but about scorched earth, black earth, that sort of thing. The land will be on fire and the concrete will melt. The quotation, the direct quotation, continues. Yet still, the narrow-minded politicians and their stupid think tanks, thoughtfully twirling a glass of wine in their hands, talk about how they can deal with us without entering into a direct war. Dull idiots with a classical education. I think that may be a reference to Boris Johnson, although Boris Johnson was by then well on his way out. Because Boris Johnson famously got a King's Scholarship to the top school in the UK, namely Eton, and then he got another scholarship to Oxford, where, and at Eton the education is largely classical. It has deep roots in long-standing knowledge. And at Oxford he read, that is to say, he studied either a trivium or a quadrivium, which are degrees in classical subjects. Now, I'm going to give you the Oxford definition right now, and of course there are more difficult degrees. For instance, Maths 55. A degree in Maths 55 is, it's beyond. It's absolutely beyond. But it is notoriously difficult to do well in the trivium and the quadrivium. In other words, they're not exactly Maths 55, but to get high passes in them is next to impossible. Let's just have a look here. The trivium. The first three liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, and logic. Okay. And Boris Johnson studied that. So he's nobody's mampara. But I just thought that was a snide reference to classical educations that perhaps don't take account of the realities of the modern world. These guys are practicing what's known as realpolitik. Realpolitik as one word with a K on the end, spelled with a K on the end. So it's a Russian concept. It may not originally have been Russian. I don't know the absolute etymology of it, but I do know that Russia, the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc, that was how they approached politics. Not through ideals, but through pragmatism, practical realities. Right, let's not waste too much time here. Oopsie. There we go. Here we go. The quadrivium, I don't think Boris Johnson did this, was arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. Okay. Enough of that. Let's get on to what did he actually talk about. Put that back. Excuse me, stretching all over the screen. So, he quoted Revelation 9:18. I'm going to read quite a bit longer than that, if you don't mind. I'm going to quote from the beginning of chapter 9, but I'm going to skip through it quickly. And then as we approach the relevant verses, I'll be more particular. But we'll just succinctly deal with the first part to give you a brief sense of context. So this is the trumpets. The seventh seal, we spoke in the previous video about the seven seals. Seal 1 revealing the first horseman of the apocalypse. Seal 2, the second horseman. Seal 3, seal 4. And the seventh seal is the prelude to the seven trumpets. So what happens with these trumpets? The first trumpet, the vegetation of the world is struck. In the second trumpet, the seas are struck. With the third trumpet, the waters are struck. And with the fourth trumpet, the heavens are struck. With the fifth trumpet, the locusts come from the bottomless pit, and the sun and the air are darkened because of the smoke of the pit, and the scorpions have power, and so on. Then the sixth trumpet, the angels from the Euphrates release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. So the four angels who had been prepared for the hour and day and month and year were released to kill a third of mankind. We're not yet at Revelation 9:18, but this is kind of a prologue to it. This is the context within which it falls. 16. Now the number of the army of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number of them. And thus I saw the horses in the vision. Those who sat on them had breastplates of fiery red, hyacinth blue, and sulfur yellow. I'm just going to have a look at something that never crossed my mind before. It's very interesting. Hyacinth blue is very much like the blue on the flag of Ukraine. I don't say that it is that, I say it's intriguing. It caught me. And sulfur yellow, I think we can all agree that yellow on the flag of the Ukraine flag is meant to represent the sunflowers, for which Ukraine is so very famous on its steppes. Endless flats, that's what a steppe is. Flat, 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 flat. Those of you who remember The World at War, do you remember that series that used to be on SABC when there was only SABC TV, no 1, 2 and 3 as such? It was initially on I believe Sunday afternoons in Afrikaans. Gee, that upset me so much. As a young English speaker on the south coast of Natal, Irish family, Irish heritage, Sunday afternoons, that the Afrikaners got that epic. Oh, I felt robbed. Like Arsène Lupin. How did you guys get Arsène Lupin? No, I know it was fair. I know very well how the dubbing worked and who got what and when. It was entirely fair, but didn't suit me, those two particular ones. Stories. You will remember maybe that this German officer or German soldier is interviewed 30 years after the war, which is when that series, The World at War, was produced. And he talked about how disconsolate it was to cross the steppes of Russia and Ukraine. I mean, they might have been in the southern army going into Russia, in which case they would have gone through Ukraine. Endless flats, unrelieved by hills or mountains or valleys, and very often unrelieved by woods too. You know, the woods are more in the north. Fiery red, hyacinth blue, and sulfur yellow. And the heads of the horses were like the heads of lions. And out of their mouths came fire, smoke, and brimstone. By these three plagues, a third of mankind was killed, by the fire and the smoke and the brimstone, which came out of their mouths. the mouths of the horses, the mouths of the vehicles transporting the horsemen. So there are 200 million horsemen on these vehicles. For their power is in their mouths and in their tails. For their tails are like serpents, having heads, and with them they do harm. So that is verses 18 and 19. I'll just go through 18 again. Alone, by these 3 plagues, a third of mankind was killed, by the fire and the smoke and the brimstone which came out of their mouths. Now I'll finish with the last of the report, now that we've gone through that. So he was saying, dull idiots with a classical education. His comments were prompted by Kiev's publication of a security treaty proposal developed under the tutelage, as in tutor, of former NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen. The draft envisions the US and its allies guaranteeing Ukraine's pre-2014 borders with weapons, ammunition, financial assistance and training, as well as committing to maintain sanctions against Russia for as long as Kiev wants, and handing over any confiscated Russian property to Ukraine. So, clearly, those security treaty proposals were drafted under the tutelage of former NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen. But given how utterly beneficial they are, totally one-sided to Ukraine's benefit, clearly Ukraine called the shots there, or Ukraine stipulated its ideals. We want all of the Donbass back. We will tell you when you're not allowed to, when you may end sanctions against Russia. You've got to give us all the weapons we need. Don't forget the ammo. And by the way, lots of money. A very, very good, excellent friend of Saitlander's, good in the sense of bright, a good source in the USA, told me, I didn't bother to ask him to send me the link. I have too much stuff to go through as it is, but this guy is never wrong. Told me that Volodymyr Zelensky flew his mom and dad to Israel in the week or in the 2 weeks preceding the 24th of February, when the Russians entered the Donbass. And apparently the house in which they're living, and this guy would get this kind of information, trust me, he'd go down deep rabbit holes. The house in which they're living, their new home, is worth $8 million. Volodymyr Zelensky bought his parents an $8 million house in Israel, in Tel Aviv, I believe, to escape the war. This is a guy who's living on a president's salary, and before that he was a cross-dressing comedian. That's what he was famous for. Playing the piano with his male member, his priapus, if that's a good way of putting it. Wearing women's tights and leathers. He has so much money. So, the long and the short of it is that Kiev wants lots of money and lots of everything, and Dmitry Medvedev is issuing a revelationary warning to the West, saying, you think you're clever, half-wits, stupid think tanks, but the concrete is going to burn. And I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, this is a long video now, I put it to you that that guy knows something that you and I don't. And his quotation of this holy book is by no means an offhand or flippant reference. It is a deep and profound reference to a circumstance of history which he understands perhaps better than almost anybody else alive today. I don't think there are many hundreds of people who understand what guys in his position do of the deeper secrets of the world and history. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, subscribe, and support us. Support us, support us, support us. Even if you can't be a Statelanders in person, paying your negligible 109 Rand a month, please donate. Donate. We're doing good work. We're fighting a good fight. And we are preparing magnificently for a very difficult time in the history of this country. Okie dokes. Cheerio. Bye-bye.